Welcome to your new favorite bookish podcast, Fully Booked and Caffeinated. I'm Kelsey,
And I'm Heather.
and today we will be discussing The Measure by Nikki Erlick. As usual, let's talk about our fuel for this discussion. What are you drinking, Heather?
Nothing caffeinated, surprisingly. It should be, but it's been crazy in my household. Everyone has COVID but me. So I didn't have time to run out and buy myself a nice fancy coffee. So I'm just having some tropical flavored water.
Okay.
Yes.
That's right. Hydrating is good, especially when everyone is getting sick.
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
My beverage is caffeinated, but it is not coffee. I'm having a chai tea with some honey to
Yummy.
hopefully get rid of my hem. So bear with me if we hear any gross vocal fry. Can't help it. Anyway, so cheers.
Cheers.
All right, let's get right into it. So, Nikki Erlick graduated from Harvard, summa cum laude, and was an editor at the Harvard Crimson, and she earned her master's in global thought from Columbia University.
Okay, sis,
So-
go off.
Right? Two things right off the bat. Flexing hard with that
Yeah.
Harvard and Columbia degree, and also a master's in global thought. Sounds so intriguing.
What even is that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked.
Oh, great.
Because I had never heard of that before, obviously. But
Same.
apparently it's an interdisciplinary degree that challenges students to explore new concepts and questions to explain the complexities of our interconnected and changing world. Global thought students learn to ask critical questions rather than offer prescriptive answers to global problems. So basically just thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to define it is because in the context of the novel that we're going to be talking about, it fits.
Yeah, it does.
Like I see the connection. So anyway, Nikki was a travel writer exploring nearly a dozen countries. She's also worked as a ghostwriter in a variety of different roles. And of course, The Measure is her debut novel. Is this all we cover on this podcast? I don't know. It might be.
Could be.
It was published in June 2022, and it has been translated into 22 languages. It was nominated for Goodreads Best Science Fiction and Best Debut Novel in 2022, and it was selected as Jenna Bush Hager and the Today Show's #ReadWithJenna book club pick, as well as the Barnes & Noble Discover pick. So Read with Jenna is a book club hosted by Jenna Bush Hager, a co-host of the Today Show. Every month, she picks a new book to read together with the book club members and discuss. So her book club is aimed at strengthening communities and igniting conversations over novels that would entertain or challenge readers' perspectives. So it's like Reese Witherspoon's book club, but on a smaller scale, from what I can tell. And I noticed that her books are definitely not as diverse genre-wise as Reese's book club. But she had a couple, like this one, she had a Kristen Hanna book on
She
there.
did.
Like there's definitely some that I recognized. So all these people with their book clubs, I mean,
know. For real.
including us, but ours is much darker than these other ones. Anyway, so this book is actually kind of hard to define genre-wise, but I think most accurately it's just contemporary or specialty fiction. It's not really dystopian because it's taking place in a world exactly like ours, just with the strings added. And some say there's like a science fiction element, but I don't think I would define the strings as sci-fi. What do you think?
I don't think I would either. It's
It's
of,
like-
it is definitely hard to define what that brings to the table because there's no real resolution of how they came there. So
Exactly.
I can
And
understand
they're
that
not-
it's so you leave it to your own interpretation, I would say. But I
Yeah.
would agree that it's definitely contemporary fiction with just a really cool storyline.
Yeah, because there's nothing that takes place in order for the strings to come, which would make it like dystopian or something.
Yeah.
It just happens. Like it could happen tomorrow to us. We'll get to that. Anyway, so here is the Goodreads summary. 8 ordinary people, 1 extraordinary choice. It seems like any other day. You wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and head out. But today, when you open your front door, waiting for you is a small wooden box. This box holds your fate inside, the answer to the exact number of years you will live. From suburban doorsteps to desert tents, every person on every continent receives the same box. In an instant, the world is thrust into a collective frenzy. Where did these boxes come from? What do they mean? Is there truth to what they promise? As society comes together and pulls apart, everyone faces the same shocking choice. Do they wish to know how long they'll live? And if so, what will they do with that knowledge? The measure charts the dawn of this new world through an unforgettable cast of characters whose decisions and fates interweave with one another. Best friends whose dreams are forever entwined, pen pals finding refuge in the unknown, a couple who thought they didn't have to rush, a doctor who cannot save himself, and a politician whose box becomes the powder keg that ultimately changes everything. So that really sets it up. I think it's weird that they start with 8 ordinary people when, yes, they're focusing on these people, but it is much bigger than that.
Yeah, but I guess because it's from the point of view of just 8 people.
Yeah, because they only have chapters from the points of view of 8. Let me also start by saying this is a very intense book to be reading right now on the back end of a global pandemic and in a time of social and political unrest. So I think that definitely influences the way this book will be received and discussed, not just with us, but as a whole.
Agreed.
That being said, we'll talk a little bit about each of these characters and how their world is kind of affected by these boxes, and then we'll get into some discussion questions. So, as the summary says, everyone wakes up one morning to find a small, indestructible box delivered to them, and inscribed on every box was a simple yet cryptic message: the measure of your life lies within. So, of course, at first, no one really believes what's happening, because why would you? It's outrageous. But pretty soon, scientists begin to study the string lengths and people who are dying suddenly, or people who have short strings versus long strings, and their health and their possibly chronic conditions. And they prove that the strings are actually real, and they start the process of narrowing down exactly how much time each string signifies. I was kind of surprised how quickly that it jumped to the science and that the scientists started working on it.
Yeah, and I thought it was I almost wish we had a little bit more information on how they determined how they could figure out the lifespan of everybody, because they said in the book it was narrowed down to minutes or hours.
Exactly. And it's like you don't have a big enough testing period to pull from, or like testing pool or whatever.
Yeah.
So that part was kind of glazed over, but I get it. I get where we have to go with that. So we'll start with a few of our main characters. Nina and Maura have been in a relationship for 2 years, and while at first they decided not to open their boxes until they know more about them, Nina caves because Maura is very determined, and they discover that Maura has a short string and Nina's is considerably long.
Heartbreaking.
How do you even comprehend?
Yeah, I don't know.
And this is like what would seem like probably a very common occurrence.
Absolutely.
And then we meet Ben, who also has a short string. He's super nervous to tell his family, and he has been betrayed in the way that he found out about his string. This fucked me up, man. So his girlfriend at the time opened his box, looked at his string, and then confronted him about the length of his string, and then broke up with him because his string was short.
Wild.
What do you think of this betrayal?
It's not fair, obviously, to either party realistically, but it's definitely not fair to Ben, because maybe he didn't want to look at his string and he didn't want to know what his lifespan was, and it's unfair that Claire was more or less, I'm a peace out now, because you only have X amount of years left, and instead of spending that time with you because I love you, I'm a head out.
So we're seeing 2 completely different ends of the spectrum where Nina and Maura decide to stay together and work through it, and Claire can't handle it. But she also took something that's so immensely personal and just tore it away from him and didn't even give him that time to process. And then later on, he says, even in the moment when she was confronting him, even though he didn't do anything wrong, she was only thinking about herself. Like, she didn't say, hey, sorry that you're going to die soon, buddy. Like, she was just like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, she sounds fucking horrible. So good for Ben.
Realistically, he's probably better off.
Yeah, I don't think those would have been a good 10 years together, which 10 years is not nothing. We got to talk about the scope of time, but we'll get there. Anyway, Ben starts going to a support group for people with short strings, and here's where we start to get to this web of connected people. Ben and Maura are both at the support group along with several other key characters, and the support group happens to be at a school where Amy, Nina's sister, works as an elementary school teacher. There's a lot of people. Just try and stick with us. So we also meet Hank. I love Hank.
I think Hank was my favorite out of everyone. His point of view and his story was my favorite out of everybody's.
I also think that he got the best development and treatment and story start to finish.
Agreed.
So Hank is a doctor at New York Memorial, and he gets a pretty unique view of the unrest of people with short strings. They're coming into the hospital in a frenzy, trying to figure out if they're sick, demanding to know what's wrong with them. Basically, they want to know, do I have some type of visible sickness, or am I going to die in a car crash or traumatically? Like, they just need some type of answers. And because of this overwhelming amount of short stringers with no visible symptoms, they start to get turned away because there's just nothing that the doctors can do for them in the emergency room.
No, and it's basically a waste of resources. Exactly.
And they're clogging up resources for people who, it sounds fucked up, but people who are actually going to live. Or people who, get into a car accident and need to have their leg saved, and that's not even a life and death situation. It's, you know what I mean? Like, so anyway, so they start to get turned away, and here is where we get our first act of violence that people associate directly with the strings. So an active shooter enters the hospital and opens fire, killing several people and ultimately being killed himself. And you guessed it, this is where the politicians get involved. Of course, because it's almost an election year.
Shocker.
So we're still in the very beginning stages of the strings and not really knowing what they mean, not having everything narrowed down to a perfect science. It's just kind of an estimate of 10 to 15 years, 8 to 10 years. Like, it's not narrowed down enough. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unrest. Half the people still don't even know if they should be believing it. Half the people, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's an in-between time. So Anthony is running for president based on a campaign that is solely based on string visibility and fear-mongering, especially after another violent act, which they initially linked to the short stringers. So there's an assassination attempt at his rally, and he blames the woman responsible for being a short stringer and being unhinged and trying to take him down. And Anthony is disgusting and a true politician, and he wants to strike fear into the citizens and is fully leaning into the discriminatory aspect of the strings. Now, the only good that comes out of this assassination attempt is Hank, who we find out was actually an even shorter stringer than we initially thought, throws himself in front of the shooter, and it's kind of a weird mixed message. He did it because his instinct is just to sacrifice himself because he's a doctor, because he's spent his whole life trying to save others. But then other people are saying, oh, he specifically tried to save this presidential candidate, even though then we find out that can't be the case because Hank is a short stringer and Anthony hates short stringers. It's very complicated.
It's a web.
It's a web. And they explain how the news just kind of runs with it in whichever way that they feel like.
Yeah.
Which is so accurate.
I was going to say, that's what the news does now.
Exactly.
Whatever headline can get the most clicks is what they're going to run with.
Exactly. And so Anthony uses this as really the catalyst for his campaign. So the government enacts a mandate saying that all FBI field agents, active military, and high-level security clearance government officials are required to disclose their string length. And it starts a debate about the string length being a way to discriminate. Same with race, sexual orientation, etc. And one of the other candidates says, we've made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, disability, and age, but forcing candidates to show their strings would be condoning an entirely new category of discrimination.
It's true.
It is, and it's something that's so unknown. It's just a whole new way to discriminate because
I know.
Aren't we always looking for one?
And it gives the
So
sense that if you're a long string compared to a short string, your life matters more than a short stringer.
1,000%, and that you are more of sound mind and that you
Mm-hmm.
are more responsible, etc. Like it's just, it really snowballs. And then we get this kind of act of rebellion where Jack, who is Anthony's nephew, and Jack's roommate and best friend Javi switch strings for the military. And it basically tears apart their friendship. It brings this question of fairness. Obviously none of it is fair, so I'm using that word ironically, but this question of fairness where Javi is desperate to defend his country and make his family proud and serve in the military in a real and powerful way. And because of fate, he's not able to fully do that. And even with the lie, he's not going to have that full life of service that he's craving. And meanwhile, Jack is benefiting from being in this powerful family with this long stringer outlook, and he has no idea what his purpose is. He has no desire to live out this military fate that's been set before him. What did you think about their storyline as a whole? Like, not just their friendship, but how it got so much bigger than that, and they really let it tear them apart.
It's like you said, it's a snowball effect because they're presented with this opportunity where you have Javi, who all he wants to do is serve his country. And because his string was short, he wouldn't have that luxury. He would just be put at a desk job because he only had, what was it, like 7 or 8 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to put him out in the field because they'd rather have the longevity of lives out there to help the casualties be lower. And then there's more people, on the soldier front. No one's dying. So it's unfair for Javi. And then you have Jack, who, like you said, has no interest in the military, was kind of forced into this. He doesn't know his purpose. He's extremely lost. And because he's so lost and doesn't know who he is as a person, him like discovering himself doesn't happen till much later on. And I think because he was so unsure of him and what his power really was with having a long string coming from the politician family, he doesn't really think about Javi and where Javi's coming from. He just kind of is selfish in a way, but also not selfish. It's hard. It's like a double-sided coin because you see the pros and you see the cons, but him and Javi have this great relationship and he mucks it all up.
Because we get that internal struggle with him too, where he's like, yeah, this is working out perfect for Javi. All he has to do is lie to the military and lie to his family and all this stuff. But secretly, Jack is like, this is good for me too, because I don't want to be out there on the front lines. I don't want to be carrying out this life that's expected of me. So he is doing all that, like you said, with a selfish edge to it, but he still wants Javi to be happy. It's his best friend. He knows how much this means to him. He knows how much this means to his family. And so in his opinion, he's doing absolutely everything that he can. And I think that Javi is just so struck by the unfairness of it all that he's like, that's all you're going to do? You're not going to run up to your uncle and scream in his face that just because I have a short string, I can't serve my country? Like, no matter what Jack does, it's never going to be enough.
Yeah, and I also think he doesn't recognize the inner struggle that Javi is facing because now he's living a life of deceit. He's lying to the military, he's lying to his family. His family thinks that he's going to be around for a very long time when in reality he's not going to. So, and he can't even tell his parents that until he dies. So his parents have to deal with the fact that they thought they were going to have their son for X amount of years when in fact it's the opposite. And so how do you change your mindset like that when you have this opportunity of knowing how long you're going to have someone, but realistically it's a lie? So Javi is living on this deceit.
Exactly. And his entire motive for everything was making his family proud. And it's like, yes, he's going to make them proud. I mean, it sounds like his family would be proud of him no matter what.
Yeah.
Especially because this is something he can't control. But all he thinks about is making his family proud. And in the end, like you said, he has to lie to them. He has to disappoint them. And they have to come to terms with the fact that he's going to die young and they're going to lose their son.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
So that whole storyline is very upsetting because it is another side that we're seeing. It is best friends and how this can tear apart their relationship, even if they both had the best intentions.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the best intentions don't work out how you expect them to. And there's, no matter what, I feel like there's just a consequence to your decisions and your actions, good or bad.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's hard, especially because they were so young, for them to accept that. So the book switches between these very specific acts in these very specific characters' lives to broader events going on. And it kind of switches back and forth, mostly through like message boards or news articles or, summaries like that. So while this is going on, a lot of people have turned to religion or faith, some to aliens or conspiracy theories. There's a quote in the book: "For many, the strings were either proof of predestination or just another reminder of the stark randomness of life, the inequities of luck. But surely the chaos didn't feel so chaotic if you believed it was part of God's plan." And this makes sense in such an unknown time. Of course, people who are already introduced to faith or religion in some capacity, they're going to cling to it. They're going to search for answers because how can this be real? It's too big to comprehend.
It is.
So long stringers start taking unnecessary risks, doing drugs, knowing that they won't die, but also not taking into effect that they can still be injured. Like,
I know.
Like, sure, I'll go skydiving, and I'm like, you could be paralyzed. But
it's just this concept that, okay, I'm gonna live until I'm 80, so I'm gonna go wild and nothing's going to happen to me. But that's not what the string signifies. It just signifies that you will live until this day, but it doesn't map out that you're going to be healthy and that everything's going to be grand.
Exactly.
That's kind of up to you. And so taking all these chances on doing drugs and doing crazy wild things, it's doesn't mean anything realistically.
There are people who live to be in their 80s and they probably wish that they hadn't because of not taking care of their health and not taking care of their bodies. So just because you're living a long life doesn't mean that you should abuse that life. And also, it doesn't seem like there's any way out if you change your mind and decide that maybe I fucked up doing all those drugs.
Yeah, which is an interesting concept in itself, because how does that tie into the ideation of like suicide and things like that? And now, because you're going to have this long life, this means that you can't cut it short on your own if you intended to.
And they have one example of that couple who gets married and they jump off a cliff or something, and the long stringer survives and the short stringer dies, and he said, I knew I wasn't going to die. Like, so you can't even take your fate into your own hands. Like, your fate is decided.
It is 100%.
And the worst part is no one's really looking at the long stringers and these decisions as anything wrong with them. Like, they're just kind of glazed over because everyone is so focused on the short stringers. So short stringers are getting targeted, they're getting fired from their jobs, health insurance premiums are increasing, and a small number start acting out the shootings, stealing money, getting revenge on others because they know they won't serve any time in jail.
And if they do, it's going to be extremely short. So that's the other side of the coin of, if you have a short life, it's like the purge.
Yeah.
More or less.
Exactly. That's exactly what I got to. So there's a quote in there: "Both embittered and emboldened by the knowledge that they wouldn't live to suffer a lengthy imprisonment, some short stringers felt almost invincible. There was no need to fear death row if you were already sitting there." And it's true. Like, when they said that, I was like, holy shit, what's gonna stop you? Because you're already angry that your life is being cut short in this finite and ridiculous way. And what's going to stop you from acting out in anger and getting revenge on someone? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's a decision every single time that something happens because you don't really have those consequences.
No, and also the people with short string, even though they're doing these acts of craziness, they're being so selfish in a sense that they're also not thinking of how it could affect a person with like a long string. So say they're going on like a shooting spree or something and they harm someone, and now this person's going to be paraplegic because this guy decided he wanted to take his anger out, and then so now an innocent is suffering. So there's so much it's like a literal web. You have to, there's so many, you think of a scenario, and then once you have a scenario in mind, you think of 700 little scenarios within it and what it the consequences are and what the outcomes are. And it's no thanks. No thanks.
And then there's another big part of it. So some short stringers decide to OD on pills. It says before their time, but it's right around their time because there's no going early. So basically, so that they won't die tragically or painfully or unexpectedly. And technically, it's illegal, but it's basically the same as terminally ill patients. So shouldn't they get to have a say in their own death? So that's a whole nother aspect to even think of.
Yeah.
Yeah, this book is deep.
But good.
So it becomes really hard for long stringers and short stringers to relate and even communicate. And Nina and Mora are a big example of this. So Mora especially has a very hard time. She's a Black gay woman who never found a place that she truly belonged. And finally, she finds a cause that she wants to fight for, even if it does make her angry. Like, she is pissed about this extra layer of discrimination that's now being put on her. But she realizes, okay, this is finally something that is worth fighting for, that I can actively fight for, that doesn't already have these preconceived notions.
Yep.
Like those other discriminatory features. You know what I mean? So the support group starts attending rallies and protests and really trying to find a way to fight against this narrative that the government is putting forth. And I love how they banded together and they became this kind of family because they actually understood each other.
Yeah. And they all are coming from the same point of view, and they don't know what to expect, but they know that their mindset is so much different than a long stringer's mindset. Like, you can definitely see that within the depth of Nina and Mora's relationship. They're so different minded about the situation too. There's this, the scenario where Mara wants to fight and go to a rally, and Nina's kind of like, and she wants Nina to go, and you get the idea that she has no interest in it. She does, but she doesn't, because she doesn't relate to it.
Yeah.
And
she's trying so hard to be supportive, but the fact of the matter is just that she can't.
Yeah.
She cannot understand it's the same exact way that she cannot understand how Mora has been discriminated against for being Black.
Yeah.
It's the same way that other people can't relate to them being discriminated against because they're gay. Like, it's just another layer of things that, yes, you can be empathetic towards and you can try and understand, but you're not going to fully understand.
No.
And so it's a way for this group to find a common ground, and they're the only ones who really can understand each other like that.
Yep. It's a relatable situation, and they understand each other on a different level than anyone else could. And
Exactly.
I love it. Like you said, it's like this little family that bands together.
And they're there to support each other. They were there to mourn Hank together. Like, they really come together in these times of happiness and sadness and anger and etc. and frustration. Like, they're just a really great support group. I don't know if we're just going to keep saying it, but you know what I mean.
It's like you have your they're like chosen family. An unexpected chosen family that, it's the best.
And we obviously are not getting into all of the characters, but the fact that they all come from such different backgrounds and different religions and different faiths and different upbringings, and it doesn't matter because, like you said, they're chosen family.
Yeah.
And we can't skip over the fact that this is extremely common, especially politicians using anything they can get their hands on to get an edge, to marginalize a community based on a small set of data or based on fear-mongering alone. It's disgusting. It's ridiculous. These people have no control over the length of their string, and yet they're being punished and grouped based on a factor that, like I said, they cannot control. Let that sink in for a second. Sounds familiar. Before I get to Kelsey on the podcast, we need to talk about Amy and Ben. Are you ready to talk about Amy and Ben?
Yes.
Okay, so they start out as anonymous pen pals, and eventually their pen pal stuff is very sweet. Amy is just lost in her books and contemplating the meaning of life, refuses to look in her box, and her and Ben, she knows that she's exchanging letters with a short stringer. And then they meet in person, and she falls in love with him. but then starts doubting their relationship. And I have issues with this, Amy, okay? I was getting real pissed for her not wanting to move forward with Ben because she specifically knew his string length when you don't even know your own string length. And of course, you knew all along that this girl's string had to be short, okay? We knew that it was coming in this book, but like, girl, who were you judging when you should have just opened your fucking box?
It also, to me, when I got to the point where she was being so doubtful and negative about the whole situation with Ben, it seems so out of character for her because she's so swept up in the romance of novels and all she wants, you get the vibe throughout her storyline that all she wants is a relationship that you find in a book. And she gets that realistically with Ben. It's a meet cute with the notes. It's a meet cute when they meet in real life. Like, what more could you ask for? And so when she's so against dating Ben because she can't understand how to deal with his life being short, then you shouldn't have even continued the pen pal relationship. Because you knew that it was going to develop into something more, even if it wasn't romantic. You're still creating a bond with this person. So what's the difference if you're a friend with them and they have a 10-year lifespan? You're just going to stop being friends with them because you can't handle it?
And how can you make that decision? Girl, your string could say 2 years left. Like, you're being so unfair to him. And then when she lets it kind of get in the way of her relationship with her sister because, she thinks Nina and Maura are rushing and she doesn't support Nina's decision to marry Maura and just spend their remaining years together.
That like, part, what? When she came for Nina about that with the same thing, how are you going to marry her when you know that she can't? That also seems so out of character. Like, this was probably the one thing that tripped me up, that took me out of the story because it just didn't line up with who the character that she was building was.
Yeah,
and I agree. That was probably the one thing that I truly disliked.
And like we said, she wanted this fairy tale, and then throughout, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, that she doesn't have all of these concerns, and they're making such a big deal about her not looking at her string, and then she's going to have this long ass string and live until she's 90. So I thought that the way that they died together was a good ending to their story. I thought it was the only way that it could round out their story, but it still pissed me off.
That broke me that they died together. And it was the perfect ending to their story and a twist that I never saw coming. To be honest, the way that Amy's story came across, and as you're reading it, you felt like she was going to be a long stringer and that she was going to raise her children on her own and everything. And it turns out like her and Ben were literally, and it's just, it's kismet, these two people whose strings are the same length end up meeting each other without even meaning to, and they both bring something to each other's lives that they both desperately needed and wanted.
And the fact that Ben was so understanding, even during her initial hesitations, he was so patient with her. He was willing to make it work, even though that he knew that she had these reservations. And then as they give a little summary of their life before they both pass, like, he's so focused on, yeah, I know that I'm not going to see my kids graduate high school, but I'm going to be there for their little league games. I'm going to see them take their first step. I'm going to take them to the park and the zoo and enjoy as many years as I can with them. Like, he finds a way to look at this in such a positive light. And it's like, even though you can see the resemblances between him and Maura and their stories, Ben is definitely less angry. He's less negative. Like, he focuses on, we don't have a choice. And this is just the hand that we're dealt, and this is how we have to deal with it. And the whole time, Amy could have known that she only had those 10 years or however long with her children, and she could have been savoring it the same way that Ben was. And instead, she was kind of preparing herself for how she's going to be a mother to her children once Ben passed. And that was fucked up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm not a fan of Amy. Not a fan. But overall, the short string is a real conundrum. because there's the freedom to live your remaining time as you want, but there's also the negative side where there's no real long-term consequences, like we talked about, that keep us relatively tied to some moral compass. Then you have the long string where you can be grieving the loss of other family and loved ones, and also taking advantage of how much time you have left and maybe not appreciating it as much.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, we all know that we're going to die someday, but this tangible, measurable timetable is that powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a quote from the book about this measure, and that the message on the box doesn't necessarily mean how many years you have, but it's the impact that your life has.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, maybe that's not the only measure we have. Maybe there are thousands of other ways we can measure our lives, the true quality of our lives, that lie within us, not within some box. And by your own measure, you can still be happy. You can live well. And at the end, they talk about how those who lost loved ones early or tragically were able to accept it a little more because they knew there was nothing to be done to prevent it. It was just meant to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's a little horrible silver lining.
It's true.
So are you ready to get to some semi-personal discussion questions?
Sure.
Heather, would you open your box?
I thought about this the entire time that I was reading this book, because this book sent me on a tailspin. It was, I fell down this thought rabbit hole, and death for me is probably one of my biggest fears. It's something that gives me so much anxiety, especially now being a mom. It's completely it really changes everything. And I worry that there's pros and cons to it. Because if I were to open my box and say Eric opened his box and we're like in a situation when we're like Nina and Mara, I know hands down that I would want to savor the remaining life that we had with each other. But if I had the longer string and he had the shorter string, it's hard to think about. You have to think about what your life will look like after, and that can affect your relationship now. Because you're thinking of the future. Absolutely. And like vice versa. So realistically, I want to say that I would, but I don't think I'd want to. I think that because I'm such a planner and I need to like know everything, and that in itself is a stressor for me. If I knew what the time that I had, I think I would try to shove so much into my life that I wouldn't be able to actually savor it and enjoy it. Whereas I can just take it day by day and accept my fate when it happens.
That is a good point. And that's living the way that we live now, never knowing when it's going to happen. I don't think that I would want to open my box, but I 1000% would. I think I would just eventually do it because of the not knowing and having it so close within my grasp. I just don't think I would be able. Like, I would never sleep because I would just be thinking about the box all the time. So I'm opening that box. So would you want to open your box with someone else or alone if you opened it?
With someone. That's not something I'd want to do on my own.
Okay. I think this is a layered question. I would say alone, especially where I am in my life right now. I've tried to rely less on other people for emotional stability and process my own feelings before turning to others. It's kind of a way of not having to deal with having expectations, like how you expect someone to respond. I do think the layer is that there's a difference between opening at the same time as someone else and just having moral support to open it, because you have to eliminate those possible feelings of jealousy or comparison or guilt. Like you said, if you and your husband open them at the same time, like immediately there's that comparison. Immediately, yes, you have that support of each other, but immediately if your strings are not the same length, you're not on the same level anymore. So that's why it's kind of like such a layer.
I don't think I'd want to open my box the same time as someone. I think I would be that layer where I would just have someone there as moral support.
Yeah. I think it could definitely be a very dark thing to go through by yourself. So the author chooses to make the box receiving age 22. Why do you think they went with 22? Because this is not an age that we normally associate with adulthood. So do you think that it's a good age? Do you think it should have been sooner, later?
It could actually be a good age because, what is it? Your brain is fully formed at 24. So,
well, for men, it's like 40, but
yeah. So like you don't have everything is not fully intact until you're 24. So it kind of gives you an opportunity for those couple of years when you're still iffy on decision making that you don't have to, I guess you don't have to feel guilty, but it also could help you make better decisions at the same time. And I think that 22 is a good age because that's like a pinnacle of your life where you're just got out of college for a majority of people, and so you're trying to figure out what trajectory you want your life to go on. So if you're 22 and you find out you have a long string, then you could decipher what kind of career and what kind of life you want. But if you have a short string, you might put your career on hold because you'd rather have life experiences over having a job. So I think 22 is a good age.
I fully agree with everything that you said, but my initial thought was that I think it is a little young. I think that's a lot of knowledge to hold at that pinnacle time in your life when you're still trying to figure out your purpose and your personality and all of these things that are so essential to living. And I think that you might lose out on the chance to truly live before you can even start.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
So it's like, I totally get that part about, especially like career making and, if you need to savor the time you have left, but it's like, it would be so fundamental to what happened to your personality and your formation as a human that it's like, it's irreversible. So it could go either way. But I think 22 is a completely random number that she chose.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any actual meaning behind it. She probably was just like, what's a good number? And 22 popped into her head, and it's fine. But it gives the reader, it's up to their own interpretation of what they feel about that. And it makes you, this book in its sense, makes you reflect on your own life 100%. And so you can think back to like when I was 22, if this had happened, would I have lived my life differently? So it's, I get it.
Yeah. And you also have to look at even people who are 22 now are way more involved in the social climate, political climate than I ever was when I was that age. So all of those things are moving younger and skewing younger, and people are being more educated, not institutionally, but educated just in the broader sense than they ever were before. So I think that if this were 10 years from now, 22 is like full adult. You know what I mean? God, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
So knowing the length of their string causes many characters to rethink their careers, their dreams, even their views on marriage and children. Some people quit their jobs, shutter their businesses, others travel to distant lands. How would knowing about your string or not knowing about it affect the way you lived your life?
That's kind of like a hard question because you'd have to look at it from both perspectives of opening your box and not opening your box. So like I said before, if I didn't open my box, I would probably just live my life how I'm living it now. But if I open my box, and depending on the length of my string, it would definitely make me do a lot of life-changing decisions. That realistically, which I guess in a sense, it's kind of ironic because if I did look at my string, it would be the kick in the ass to make the life-changing decisions that I know I need to make, but I'm not in my current real life. So it's kind of ironic that I'm like, no, I don't want to know, because then it puts a pressure on me and makes me scared, and I don't like doing things that upset people.
You're still thinking about this book.
I'm still thinking about this book. This book fucked me up.
Oh, yeah. I would hope that regardless, it would affect the way I lived in a positive way. And I know that I'm not always the most positive person, but if I were a short stringer, I would 100% travel the world, spend time with people I love, and try to earn some good karma for my next trip to Earth. And if I were a long stringer, I would hope, this is the hard part, I would hope that I wouldn't take that for granted, and that I would be able to be a voice for short stringers and enjoy every moment with my friends and family, especially if they had shorter strings. But that's the part that's so complicated, because right now, even though we know that we could die literally at any time, we still think with this mindset of we have so much time left. So like you said, we do need a kick in the ass to change certain circumstances in our life, and we just keep putting it off, and the days just keep passing, and we think we have so much time, and before we know it, years have passed. So I feel like having a long string would be as hard as having a short string in that aspect.
Yeah, I wish you weren't personally attacking me right now, but it's not a fun time for me right now.
Don't do anything dramatic tomorrow.
I'm not. No, I'm not. Trust me. But it's like you said. Yeah, I think having a short string would put your life in a different perspective, knowing the longevity difference. But it's almost like, I feel like it's almost beneficial to live your life like you have a short string, because you're going to want to accomplish everything that you've wanted to and stop putting it off. Like, I'm the world's biggest procrastinator. I have been my entire life. So I think if I had a short string, it would make me want to do all the things I want to do, because I would die with regrets, and I don't want to do that.
Exactly. So I think basically I'm convincing you that you would have to open your box. But let's carry on.
I feel like you would pressure me into doing it. You would be the Mora to my Nina, or you would be the what was it? Yeah, the Mora to my Nina, because didn't she not want to open it?
Yeah. She was like, I mean, you don't have to open it, but I'm opening mine. Yeah. And Nina's like, well, I'm not going to let you open it by yourself.
Exactly. That's like the epitome of our relationship. If you're going to do it, I'm obviously going to do it.
Like, I mean, okay, fine. I guess we're doing it then. I guess you made the decision for us. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so in today's world, do you think the arrival of the strings would bring out the worst in people or the best? Would you view the boxes as a gift or a curse?
It would bring out the worst in this climate of life. It would bring out the worst in people, because we're at a time in our lives right now where things are just so screwed up. Things that were resolved years ago are now coming back to light and becoming an issue again when there's no need for them to become an issue. And people would use this as an excuse to do all the disgusting, terrible things that they want to do, because there's no repercussions. If I'm going to die next week, I can be an asshole. And
1000%.
The climate that we live in and the type of people that walk this earth, a majority of them they wouldn't use it in a positive light. They just wouldn't. And that's so unfortunate to say.
I couldn't agree more. I totally agree that our world is in a very difficult time right now. I think any little catalyst can bring out the worst in people. And I definitely think it would be a balance, as it was in the book, starting off really shitty and then people finding a way to find the positive and start a revolution, where in the book the young people weren't obsessed with their boxes. They decided they weren't going to open them, and people wouldn't be discriminated against. But unfortunately, I think that these things usually start out negatively before they can be reframed, and sometimes they get so bad that the upswing is barely balancing out.
It's not bringing the effect that it should, because it would truly be the catalyst that would rip this earth apart. There would be nothing left.
Mora even mentions that at one part, saying that, things were slowly starting to change for the short stringers, but it was just nothing compared to how quickly they went badly in the first place. And I think that's exactly how it would be. So there's the obvious danger and drawbacks of the boxes, but there's that little positive part too. And I think the reason that personally I wouldn't want to know, like I said, if I got my box, I have to open it. But the reason that I wouldn't want this whole thing to happen is something that Amy said. And we know I don't like Amy, but she had a good quote in here. Since the strings arrived, so many of our conversations are about such big, heavy ideas, literally life and death. And I miss talking about the little things, especially in a city filled with so many wonderful little things. Everything has instantly become heavy and life or death, and there's not much space to just enjoy life, whether it's a little time or a lot of time. And we see this where Mora and Nina are planning their wedding, and Mora insists on going to the rally instead of living in that small moment with Nina. And I'm not saying who's right or wrong in that situation, because I truly don't know. Like, Mora is fighting for something that has become her entire life and that she feels fulfilled fighting for, but then she's also missing out on that day of little moments with the love of her life, who she knows that she has limited time with. So there is no right and wrong.
There's not, especially in this situation, because it's almost like you can live your life on two separate timelines. You can either you can try to look at it as what would be the outcome if I did this, and what would be the outcome of what I did this. It's basically what we do on a daily basis, but it's so much more amplified in this, and it's so much more intense and
tangible.
Exactly. And so, Mora would rather put herself into something that's bigger than her, because she gets more out of it. because she wants to be like, she wants to change somebody's life, and this changes her life. Whereas with Nina, of course it changes her life, but on a smaller scale than what is currently going on in the world.
And Nina's basically walking on eggshells to make sure that Mora is okay. And in the end, Mora does the best possible thing. She has the best possible ending. She ends up working for that foundation and, you know, exposing the big secret with Jack and, you know, taking that piece of shit president down off of his pedestal. But I really liked how that came full circle because, like you said, it was something that was bigger than herself. She wanted to have a lasting impression, especially knowing that she would not be around to keep fighting. So before we get to our ratings, I want to read one more quote from the book, which really resonated with me a lot. What if we knew that our waiter, our cab driver, our teacher had a short string? Would we show them greater kindness? And it's like a whole nother layer of not just looking at how you would deal with your string and you would deal with your families and your friends or your support group, but complete strangers. Like, would you treat them differently if you knew that they only had a month left to live? Would you be kinder to people? Because the fact is, it's true that any of us could die at any time. So why aren't we kinder? Why aren't we treating people better?
That is the conundrum that seems to never have been solved when it's so fucking easy to solve.
And so obvious. And this is coming from a grumpy person.
I know. It's just, it doesn't, it takes you 5 seconds to just be nice to somebody and to not be a total dick. And it's the people that do that are just actively being assholes. And it's like, why? Like, what does that really bring you joy to be mean to somebody else? So it's.
And it's like that whole thing of, you know, what you used to hear when you're younger, like, you never know what struggles other people are going through. And this is exactly that. Like, you do not know if they're struggling knowing that they're gonna die tomorrow or that they're not gonna see their children grow up, or it's mind-blowing. This book is fucked up.
Yeah, it is.
I'm upset.
I'm upset.
Okay. I'm upset. So are you ready to get to the ratings?
There was one other thing in the book that I really enjoyed that came full circle, was the conundrum of Mara and wanting to be a mom, and how, because early on in her relationship with Nina, they decided that they did not want to have kids. But when Mara finds out that she's going to have a shorter life, it makes her reflect on that decision and makes her think, wait, do I want to experience that? And in the end, you know, she decides not to, because she knows it's not something that Nina wants, and it would be too much. And then in the end, Nina ends up becoming the guardians of Amy's children because Amy died young. So even though, again, Nina didn't want children, it was kind of thrust upon her, and she did amazing at it. So it's that whole...
And she wouldn't have had it any other way.
That whole full circle moment of just knowing that Mara wanted kids and then deciding not to because she knew Nina didn't want them. And then Nina ended up having children as her, you know, had to raise children as her own. It's just, that was a really beautiful situation for me.
I agree with that. And I definitely knew that this would be a different reading for you also as a mom.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't even imagine that part of it.
Yeah.
But I really loved how that came full circle. I also really loved how it was such a small thing, but when Ben finds that random girl who received the lungs from Hank because he was an organ donor.
It was someone who was... her story was told earlier on in the novel. And so again, this author just did such a great job of really bringing things together and introducing them at different points in the novel that you think are insignificant. And then you get to the end of the novel and you're like, oh no, that moment was significant. That little moment that she put in the book, it all ties in. I don't think she left any loopholes. I think everything was really nicely tied up, and it all made sense when you got to the end.
And it wasn't just those 8 characters, even though, like we said, it was from their POVs. Like,
it was
this
so
was
much more.
A random person that he met in the ER, and the mom was saying, I peeked in my daughter's box and I feel so horrible for betraying her, but she has a long string and she's going to survive, and these lungs didn't work out, but eventually they will. And the fact that it was Hank's, I was like, okay, this intertwining is impressive.
It is. Yeah, 100%.
All right, so our rating scale is intersecting strings.
Oh, that's fun.
So how many intersecting strings are you giving this book?
You know, it was funny because while I was reading it, I had seen so many people commenting about it on like Goodreads and saying this was like the best book I ever read. I know it was instant 5 stars. And as I was reading it, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't getting that feeling that everyone else was getting until it hit the very end. And then it was kind of, it all clicked together and I was like, oh, I get it. So throughout the book, I was like, I don't think I can give this 5 stars. I think it's just going to be like a strong 4.5. But no, when I got to the end of the book, I was like, no, this is actually a solid 5-star book.
It's so funny that you say that because I was having the same internal
Mm-hmm.
struggle. I am still giving it 4.5 because I absolutely love the concept. I thought it was thought provoking. I mean, obviously, just based
Mm-hmm.
on our discussion, I think it was fucking terrifying. I enjoyed reading it, but I think the problem that I had was just with so many characters and so many different stories, it's that most of the particular timelines couldn't be focused on enough. Like every character could have had a little bit more development, a little more impact. I think it's an amazing book club book. It really sparks a lot of discussion and just internal dialogue that I think is really interesting. And there's also a lot more that we could have gotten into regarding the social,
Mm-hmm.
societal, discriminatory discussions, but
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to keep it as close to the book as we could because you know how I get when I start ranting. But all that being said, I think as a debut novel, this is mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a concept that it scares me to think too much about. Like the existential dread is real.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that, I think that she did an amazing job. I think that it could have been even longer and I would have been okay with that. Like
I
with
agree with
them
that.
diving into it more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, am I happy we read it? Yes. Am I upset we read it? Also, yes.
Yeah, it was good. It was, like you said,
Yeah.
definitely a thought-provoking book. And a good way
And
to start 2024.
oh my God, this is a bad choice. I apologize, everyone. Oh God, it's an election year. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Great. That's all we have for you today. If you like what you heard, please make sure to follow, subscribe, and rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. If you have any book recommendations, questions for us, or thoughts on this book, you can email us at fullybookedcalfpod@gmail.com. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram at fullybookedcalfpod to see our upcoming reads and to see other reviews of books that we are reading and not reviewing. Thanks for checking us out, and remember,
If you need us, we're fully booked and thinking about death constantly now.
fuck my life. Bye.
Bye.